The wind howls across the steppes, but it is not the wind. It is the gallop of hooves, distant but certain, carving a rhythm across the frozen skin of the earth. Smoke coils upward from burnt villages, and somewhere beneath the ash, the bodies are still warm. History remembers the victors, legends the heroes, but silence is the graveyard where the truth is buried. In Disney's retelling of ancient China's defense against the northern hordes, we meet a villain, Böri Khan, dark-eyed, savage, faceless, a warlord draped in animal skin, seeking vengeance for his father's death. Fiction draws him in strokes of brutality, but behind that fiction is a shadow, one cast by centuries of erased memory. The real enemy was never a single man, but a tide of nomadic despair, imperial betrayal, and empire's grinding bone beneath their banners. The man we now call Böri Khan may never have had a name at all, but his people did, and their cries were real. This is not a story of good versus evil. It is a story of extinction today. We strip away the legend of Böri Khan, not to redeem him, but to understand the world that gave birth to him. Because sometimes the villain is just the last man standing before silence. The cold did not come like a storm. It arrived in silence, settling into the bones of the land like an ancient grief. North of the Yellow River, the soil was not soft, not made for roots or rice or ceremony. It cracked beneath the hoof, sharp and wind-bitten, a skin too dry to hold memory. There were no harvest festivals here, no jade tablets buried beneath palaces, just endless sky, iron frost, and the low groan of hunger riding with the wind. Here, the people did not build walls. They rode. Children were taught to balance in the saddle before they could walk. Horses were not beasts, they were limbs. And the land, merciless as it was, offered one thing no empire could: freedom that tasted like blood in the throat and cold in the lungs. The tribes of the steppe did not see themselves as scattered. They saw themselves as unbound. And what was empire but a cage made of rules someone else had written? To the south, the dynasties chanted their names into marble: Han, Sui, Tang, Song. Each dynasty a mask over the same mouth-uttering laws, drawing borders, stamping edicts with vermilion ink. They cultivated the land, worshipped permanence, and wrote history on silk. They feared the wind, feared the nomads who would not kneel, feared the emptiness from which wolves emerged. So they built the wall. It did not begin as one. At first, it was wood and dirt, a thread of fear sewn loosely across the northern borderlands. But fear is persistent, and kings, like farmers, return to what grows. Over centuries, the wall calcified into stone, spines of brick stretching across, the back of the earth like the ribs of a long-dead god. It was not just a defense, it was a rejection, a denial of the steppe's right to exist on equal terms. On one side, order, hierarchy, legacy; on the other, smoke, speed, survival. No treaty held long, no alliance meant forever. When famine gripped the grasslands, the tribes rode south, not as invaders, but as the starving. But empire saw them only as threat. The wall did not ask why they came. It only stood. Böri Khan would not be born for generations, but the scar that would become him had already been carved into the flesh of the continent. Each skirmish, each betrayal, each winter without grain deepened the fracture. Fathers told sons stories of broken promises. Sons buried fathers in frozen soil. And still the wall stood, unblinking, on the steppe. Memory did not live in books. It lived in the rhythm of hooves, in the names whispered beside campfires before sleep. Names that would never appear in Chinese records. Names that would not be mourned when slaughtered. Names that vanished like breath in frost, the empire told. Itself, it was defending civilization. But walls do not civilize. They isolate. And what they keep out does not disappear. It hardens, it waits, it remembers. Far north of the capital, a child might look south and see not safety but rejection. He would see the wall not as protection, but as punishment, a monument to the belief that his blood was worth less than ink, that his gods were filth, that his name, when spoken, should be said with spit. The wall became the wound, and the wolf began to circle, not yet with teeth, but with hunger, and hunger, when fed enough, silence becomes prophecy. The earth does not speak of them, not anymore. Their names, once sung across the cold plains in chants carried by wind and hoof, are now ground into dust, brittle syllables left behind by tongues that were never taught to write. No marble monuments carry their deeds. No painted scrolls line their temples. What survives are ruins mislabeled, stories misread, bones unnamed, but they were there. They moved like smoke, scattered and formless, only to those who never listened. Zhongnu Rurin, Gake Turks, Hephthalites, Ashina, each a breath in a sentence never allowed to be completed, each a branch growing out of silence. They were not a horde. They were not a blur. They were fathers, daughters, war chiefs, herdsmen, dreamers. They were people, and they were erased. The soil they rode over knew no borders. Their sky had no ceiling. What they worshipped did not wear silk or speak with imperial inflection. It was the wind, the thunder, the sacred wolf that walked behind the stars. Their gods did not demand loyalty to palaces, only to survival, only to the rhythm of the earth. But to the south, this rhythm was chaos. This freedom was treason. And so they were renamed. Barbarian, a word sharpened into a blade, used not to describe, but to deny. And denial is a kind of death. When imperial scribes scratched their records in lacquered halls, they did not spell the names of these people. They distorted them. They shrank them into caricatures, into enemies, into darkness pressing against the light. One name, Hun, devoured the rest. A single mask placed over dozens of forgotten faces. It did not matter where the stories began. It only mattered how. They ended in conquest, in rebellion, in fire, and then in silence. The steppe does not preserve bodies. Wind scatters ashes. Bones bleach under open sky. There are no mausoleums for the vanquished tribes. Their memory clings instead to fragments scratched bronze, buried stirrups, a faded carving on a stolen saddle. But none of it holds the weight of who they were. Not truly. Not the softness in their grief. Not the sound a mother makes when her child dies of frost. Not the way the stars looked over a winter campfire when the wolves were near and no one could sleep. They were not without violence. No people are. But theirs was the violence of a world that gave nothing freely. They hunted, raided, retaliated. But they also sang, herded, wept. And when they were broken by drought, by swords, by centuries of being named monsters, they disappeared without mourning. Now, when the stories are retold, they return only as shadows. Faceless, wordless, mounted specters galloping out of northern mists to die on command in children's fables. Böri Khan will be made of these shadows, pieced together from the fragments that empires allowed to survive. He will not be a man. He will be every name that was never spoken again. Every child that died with a tongue full of songs no one wrote down. In the end, history did not kill them. Obedience did. Obedience to a world that said only palaces are holy. Only silk is pure. Only what is written deserves to last. And so they vanished. But ash does not vanish. It settles, and sometimes in the stillness before a war, you can taste it in the air. Bitter, burnt, waiting. It begins with a gift, a silk banner, a jeweled belt, the soft rustle of robes in a stone hall where no one breathes too loudly. A chieftain bows, not out of reverence, but calculation. His palms are calloused, burned by rains and fire, not pen and brush. He does not speak the court's language, but he knows what is being offered, or thinks he does. A treaty is signed. Wine is poured. The emperor's lips curve, not into a smile, but a warning dressed in pleasantry. This is how trust dies. They were called forward as allies. Brave horsemen from the wind-bitten north, promised silver, land, legitimacy. Their warriors were absorbed into imperial ranks. Their daughters married into noble houses. Their sons sent south to be educated. Their gods were not outlawed just ... ignored. Their names were not erased, only changed, softened to suit palace tongues. The emperor called them brothers. But he built new walls behind the feast hall. In time, those who rode for the empire were fed to it. The soldiers were used first placed at the edges, at the borders, the front lines of dying campaigns, buried in other people's wars. Their wives wept behind clay walls they had never chosen to live within. The sons who learned to speak the imperial tongue forgot the prayers of their mothers, and those who remembered were punished quietly, denied rank, denied food, denied names. They were no longer guests, they were fodder. Some rebelled. Small, scattered, loud enough to provoke, never loud enough to win. For each act of defiance, the court responded with ritual. A letter of condemnation, a military raid, 1,000 executions, one for each drop of spilled loyalty. Those who remained obedient watched with hollow eyes as their blood was spent like ink. They were not considered traitors, even then, just mistakes. Dogs too close to the fire, and still they bowed, because hunger is a silencer. And hope, once infected with fear, becomes obedience. There was one story, a boy taken from the steppes and raised within the southern court. His hair was shaved in the imperial style, his tongue trained to say thank you before his fists could form a proper grip. He was told to forget his father's name. He did, but it came back to him in a dream, years later, as he stood over the corpse of a rebel general with eyes like his own. He never slept again. Empires do not betray with swords. They betray with silence, with waiting, with the promise of inclusion that always stops 1 inch before belonging. In the north, the old men whispered around the fire, but softer now. Their children no longer listened. The stories sounded like failure, like desperation. The betrayal was not loud. It was not sudden. It was layered like silk over a bruise, like lies over a grave, and in time, the wolves stopped knocking. They watched, they remembered, and beneath the frost, their hearts coiled like iron in the fire, waiting for the right wind to rise. It would not be the first betrayal, but it would be the last that was forgiven. They say the wolf howls to find its kin, but what does it become when no one howls back? In the languages of the steppe, the word gokri is not just a name. It is a bloodline, a myth, a wound. It means wolf, not the beast of fairy tales, but the sacred ancestor, the one who led the first orphans to shelter, who fed them with her own milk beneath a sky that had no god yet. In stories passed mouth to mouth beside frozen fires, the wolf was not feared. She was followed, revered. When a warrior was born under a full moon, the elders said the spirit of Böri had touched his lungs. But stories cannot feed you, and worship does not stop starvation. Somewhere north of the Yellow River, there was a boy. His name is not remembered. He may never have had one. He was born after the last treaty burned, after the soldiers stopped pretending to leave gifts behind. His father taught him how to grip a bowstring before he was old enough to understand mercy. His mother sang the old names in her sleep. The boy listened, because listening was all they had left. The songs were brittle, and no one was writing them down. The empire did not see him, not as a person, only as threat or, worse, as potential. a future corpse, or a tool. He watched his cousins ride south to enlist in wars they didn't understand. He watched their braids cut off, their silence deepen. When they returned, if they returned, they smelled of incense and shame. They bowed at gates that once called them dogs. The boy never forgot that smell. It stayed in his chest like smoke, so he did not go. He became a whisper, a myth stitched together from stolen words. When they needed a villain, they gave him a name. Böri Khan, as if one man could contain the grief of 1,000 erased names. As if vengeance could have coordinates. But he was not a man. He was a vessel. He carried the hunger of the abandoned. The weight of ashes swept off stone floors. He became the echo that rattled in the bones of sleeping emperors. There are no portraits of him, no accurate descriptions. He does not belong to a flag. His face was carved by the cold, his voice shaped by thunder. He was born not once, but endlessly, each time a treaty was signed with false promises. Each time a boy watched his language disappear from his mother's mouth. Each time a fire went out, and no one came back to relight it. Böri was not his name. Böri was what they feared he might become, a memory they could no longer control, a howl with no answer. The wind does not speak in words. It whispers through broken doors, lifts ash from old battlefields, sings through the ribcage of a horse long dead. On the steppe, silence is not emptiness. It is memory. And memory, when starved long enough, ferments into vengeance, not the vengeance of vengeance tales. No roaring, no glory, just a slow fire. The kind that doesn't warm you, the kind that waits beneath the frost, patient and bitter. It begins with forgetting forced forgetting. The names you were told not to speak, the ancestors too dangerous to honor, the gods you were warned would shame you. And when you cannot grieve aloud, grief turns inward, hardens, sharpens, waits. The steppe tribes had already buried their dead. But the empire came for the living, not always with blades. Often with ink, with maps, with treaties that sliced the air, thinner than skin, with fire that did not only burn yurts, but language, song, meaning, and when something essential is taken, when even your rage is dismissed, you learn a new tongue, one the conqueror understands. Not words, but flame, arrow, scar. Vengeance becomes the only voice left when every other one has been smothered under silk. The boy who lost his father to an ambush remembers. The woman who watched her village burn remembers. The elder who taught children how to pray in secret remembers, even as his own tongue begins to forget. And Böri Khan, whether he was born with that name or swallowed it later like dry bone, remembers not just his pain, but everyone else's. Vengeance was not his choice. It was his inheritance. The Chinese emperors believed walls could contain the world. But walls do not just hold bodies, they hold silence. They suppress sound until it builds into pressure. And when silence breaks, it does not do so with language. It ruptures, bleeds, screams. There is no justice in Böri's war, no righteousness, no balance of the scales. His vengeance is not aimed at a single man, or court, or fortress. It is for the children whose tongues were reshaped, the herders conscripted, the daughters gifted as wives and swallowed by cities that renamed them. It is a language made of blood and hoofbeat. And though it is crude, though it cannot build temples or write poetry, it can be understood, especially by those who never listened before. This is what the empire never understood. Silence is not surrender. It is gestation. It is waiting for enough names to be buried that when one rises to speak for them all, the sound carries farther than any bell in any capital. And the message is never complicated. You did not just erase us, you taught us how to return. He appears in shadow, wrapped in furs, eyes blackened like soot, a blade strapped across his back like a curse passed down. He says little. He kills without poetry. He snarls, not grieves. He burns, but never mourns what burns. This is how the West remembers the steppe, not through history, but through myth, through movies, through Böri Khan rendered by Disney, not as a person, but as a presence. A shape carved from vengeance and smeared across the screen like smoke that never clears. He is the villain of Mulan, 2020. But he is not Böri. He is the echo of every fear imperial memory still refuses to forget. They gave him rage, but not sorrow, strength, but not hunger, fire, but not the cold that comes after. His father's death is a plot point, his war a device. He exists not to be understood, but to be overcome. He is not a man. He is the other. Before him, there was Shan Yu, the animated specter from the 1998 film. Even more monstrous, gray-skinned, hulking, yellow-eyed, a nightmare stitched from the fabric of everything the steppe was never allowed to be. Intelligent, wounded, human. He does not speak in grief. He speaks in growls. He is the wolf stripped of myth, the fire without fuel, the threat without memory. They made the wall again, only this time with pixels, and on that wall, they nailed every fear the empire ever had of the wilderness, of movement, of people who cannot be conquered with paper. These characters are not representations. They are omissions. The soft parts have been cut away, the history erased. No tribal names, no sacred language, no homeland scorched to feed in others. Monument, no quiet ache of remembering too much and being allowed to say none of it. Böri Khan, as Disney offers him, does not belong to any world. He floats above it, hollow, voiceless, easily slain. But something lingers, because even hollow, the shape is too old to forget. Audiences feel it, they don't know why. They watch the fire, and for a second, believe he might be more. That behind. His glare is not just fury, but history, and that's the danger when pain is aesthetic, when grief is flattened, when the voice of the disappeared becomes a line of dialogue tossed to the floor like spent arrows. This isn't just misrepresentation. It's a ritual, a way of repeating the silence, a way of saying again, these people were never really people. And the wolf howls, not because he's evil, but because no one has ever let him speak. So he burns, because on the screen, as in the records, he is only allowed to die. The snow never stopped falling, not thick, not soft, just steady, like a forgetting that took its time. The wind carried no names, the earth held no bones. There were no headstones, no relics, no carved tablets etched with memory. Only the silence. Of the steppe, white as an erased page, this is what extinction feels like when it's not violent, when it's not loud, when it doesn't come with screams or fire. Just quiet, just absorption. One syllable at a time, they called them many things: nomads, raiders, invaders, barbarians. But not by the names they gave themselves. Those were lost first, not in war, in translation, in treaties signed with hands that trembled from hunger, then discarded, in stories retold by those who didn't care to listen, in tongues broken to fit palace speech. And when the names disappear, the people vanish soon after. No museums hold their sorrow. No flags mourn their fading. Their gods were too wild for temples. Their memories too scattered for books. The smoke from their hearths drifted into nothing, and history did not follow it. Some were absorbed, married into the courts that once hunted them, given new titles, new dialects, new duties. Their children grew up wearing silk, bowing at gates, forgetting how to ride. Others fled, swallowed by forests, mountains, deserts, becoming rumors, then shadows, then echoes. And some simply vanished. Not all were killed, but all were ended, Not a single empire wept for them. Only the wind remembered where they fell. There is a cruelty in how the powerful erase, not with blood, but with names. They reduce legacies into roles. Chieftain becomes warlord. Clan becomes enemy. Belief becomes savagery. And when memory is no longer preserved, it can be remade. The wolf becomes the villain, the wanderer, the threat, the fallen, the deserved. So Böri Khan is all that's left. Not a man, not a hero, not even a story. Just a mask worn by the unknown. A final flicker of what once stretched across the horizon like flame, like thunder, like freedom. He is not remembered because he was great. He is remembered because he was useful. A silhouette to pin fear on. A shape to fill the silence. There were once 1,000 like him. Some with softer eyes. Some with rougher hands. Some who sang. Some who prayed. All gone now, reduced to a single figure riding out of dust. And even he is fiction. But somewhere in the northern cold, beneath snow that no longer remembers fire, the land still holds something. A whisper, maybe. A rhythm. A presence that refuses to die because it was never allowed to live. And if you listen closely, you will hear it, not in words, in wind, and wind never forgets. It begins again, hoofbeats. Dull, heavy, distant thudding against frozen earth like the last heartbeat of something that once lived free. The sky is the color of iron. The wind smells of ash. And the sound isn't war yet. It's something older, something quieter, a rhythm passed down before language, before flags, before lies. The wolf rides again, not a man, not a name, a presence, a question the world never wanted to answer. Böri Khan does not exist, but he was made, crafted from fear, carved from silence, stitched together by storytellers who needed an enemy and knew no other face. They gave him the steppe as a backdrop, vengeance as a motive, and death as a conclusion. But what they gave him in fiction, they first stole in truth. They called him invader, savage, warlord. They never asked where he was born, who buried his father, what language his mother wept in when she realized her son had no country. They needed a villain, not a person, a shadow, not a story. And so he rides alone, always. Through every retelling, history does not mourn men like Böri. It names them only when useful, when their blood justifies stone walls, when their rage excuses conquest, when their silhouette makes the empire look clean. His kind is remembered not for who they were, but for what they threatened. Not for what they built, but what they were blamed for burning. But beneath every accusation is an absence, no letters, no funerals, no altars, just wind. Just the same cold stretch of earth where once there were fires and voices and songs now lost beneath centuries of frost. This is how power survives, not by preserving its own truth, but by obliterating everyone else's, by turning people into symbols, pain into noise, resistance into madness, by flattening complexity until even the enemy forgets what they were fighting for. And in that forgetting, the world goes quiet. But Böri Khan is not quiet. He rides not because he seeks war, but because war is the only language left to those whom peace has never served. His blade is not a threat. It is a memory sharpened into steel, a last attempt to be seen, and if you listen, not to the screen, but to the silence behind it, you will hear what he really is, a requiem, for the names never written, for the prayers that turned to dust inside sealed lips, for the mothers who fed their children stories that would never reach adulthood, for the wolves who walked beside men who forgot how to howl. He rides into legend, not because he wants to, but because he was given nowhere else to go. He is not a man. He is an aftermath, and every time his figure returns, in story or screen or whispered warning, the hooves strike harder. not because he is coming, but because he was never allowed to arrive. Not truly, the wind rises. The snow begins to fall, and somewhere beyond the wall, the earth shivers. Not from fear, but from memory, and memory does not die. It rides.